We do know that with an enormous amount of money and the great talent in China, which is very real, they are very close. It's very different now than 2 years ago. Right. But they're in the race, and they're in the race of the most important technology that will ever be invented in our lifetimes. Because the arrival of a non-human intelligence with this kind of power under our control is very important.
Hello, I'm Beena Venkatraman. I'm a columnist at the Washington Post and also an editor at large. I'm delighted today to welcome Eric Schmidt, the former CEO and chairman of Google, and also the author of a new book, Genesis: Artificial Intelligence, Hope, and the Human Spirit. Great to see you, Eric, and welcome back to Washington Post Live.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see you again, Beena.
So I want to get into a conversation about the promise and the perils of AI and what you see, and also the dynamic with respect to China, which we saw you talking about with Fareed there. But before we do that, I kind of want to start with just you as a scientist, because I think a lot of people know about the Eric Schmidt who led Google during its period of explosive growth, and not that many people think of you as I do, which is primarily as a computer scientist and engineer first. And in this book, you wrote about AI and the period we're entering with AI as a sort of polymath on steroids. So this notion that AI will enable us to do things in science that have never been done before. Can you say more about that and what the upside of that in terms of the promise will be for people?
So the gains in science are extraordinary right now, and I don't think people understand them. I am a computer scientist, and of course by training, but not a particularly good one now, but I do understand science. And I'll give you an example. In material science, the development of new materials for hardening, energy release, climate change, crucial for everything. In terms of drugs and drug discovery, the AlphaFold, which is the discovery of essentially all of the interesting proteins, has shown us that we can actually predict drug sequences and the way in which they'll interact in technologies that are really extraordinary. What happens is that the computer basically takes the idea from the human and then goes through all of the scenarios at roughly the same time, much faster than a human can do. So what I like about AI in science is it's a really good example of the first real phase of AI, which is humans and AI collaborating to solve really important problems. And you're going to see this is just the beginning of an explosion. Climate, diseases, physics, chemistry, math, obviously, things like that.
What do you think about when you think about the uses for health and climate in particular? There's this sort of, potential explosion in our ability to solve problems at the scientific level that you're describing, because AI can do more with more data, can integrate data from different sources and different disciplines and find connections that humans can't maybe currently find, or at least find very slowly. But what are sort of the risks we face, if we have AI able to do things that are beyond human intelligence? You've talked about some of this in the book, and I want to get your sense of where the downsides of that might be.
Well, first, the way this is going to work in science is that problems where the data already exists or where the verification is very easy will be the problems that are solved first. And there are two that are quite obvious. One is computing, that is programming, and another one is math. Because with a computer program, you can keep generating programs until you find one that actually works. You know what success looks like. And with math, you can keep generating proofs until you find proofs that are proven, because we know how to prove proofs. and also the language of those two subdisciplines of science are relatively simple. They don't require reading all of the novels of the world, whereas human language is much more complicated. So we expect gains in the next year to 2 years, which will produce superhuman mathematicians, superhuman programmers, at least in some areas. So it starts with the easiest problems to solve, the ones where the data is abundant, and off they go. Now, when you look at it, there's a duality, right? So the more you get good at biology, the more you can build very complicated biological genetic organisms, the more you can produce viruses that we have no antidote for, so forth. My view for the last year or two has been that the largest two dangers of this are cyber attacks and biology. Cyber attacks because somehow the world tolerates China doing cyber attacks against American infrastructure and we just yell at them. And in virology, as you know, because you actually studied a lot of this, viruses are really simple, and the ability to produce dangerous, simple viruses could not be greater. Now, obviously, to produce that virus, you have to have a machine that will then make the virus for you. And so a whole bunch of people are working on how to make sure those machines don't get into bad people's hands.
In terms of the applications of AI beyond science, we hear a lot about some of the potential downsides, whether that's the power demands of AI and how that will implicate the climate, the disinformation that AI makes scale-wise much easier to put out and distribute in the world. How do you've said that we are both not ready for the age of AI we are entering, or maybe have already entered, but we're also not going fast enough. Help me reconcile those two seemingly paradoxical statements.
Well, first place, let's understand, and the book is really about this. We want to maximize the benefit of this most powerful technology. This is the most powerful technology that will be invented in our lifetimes. It's as important as electricity and heating and air conditioning and things like that, the automobile, maybe more so, because it's intelligence that humans can use, abuse, and so forth and so on. And furthermore, it's intelligence that's available to everyone. So it's extraordinarily powerful. We have to, and we say this over and over again, we have to do this respecting human values, human dignity. And because these systems are non-human, they don't necessarily have our morals, our restraints, our religions, and so forth, unless they're forced to do so. So the book is a lot about that. And we actually start with the discussion of polymaths. And it turns out that if you look at human history, a small number of individuals, Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, these sorts of people, really initiated whole new waves of invention and thought and so forth. So now we have a scenario where in the next few years, every human on the planet will have access to a polymath. So this means that when you go to the museum, you'll have Leonardo da Vinci to tell it, well, the brush strokes weren't so good and I did a better job and that kind of stuff, which is sort of humorous and interesting. But it also empowers bad state actors. There's another aspect of this that's important to resolve the tension. So you obviously have to worry about that. It looks to me, and I'll say this very directly, this is a race between the US and China. Both countries have a willingness, a goal, a national policy. They have the capital, they have the energy, and they have the people at scale that almost no other country has. That fight is the epic fight. As you know, in the US, we've been trying to slow China down a bit. It's been somewhat successful, but not hugely successful. And China is doubling down. They've recently now brought out models that are analogous or similar to the best models in America, which was shocking to me. The competition is important because as you get closer and closer to general intelligence, you can build your own AI scientists. And if you add more, you have human scientists and AI scientists, you can supercharge and get there so much faster.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about what's perceived by many as a sort of AI arms race with China and separate some of the hype from reality here. Can you help us understand, because I think there was a period at which everyone thought we need to accelerate because China's accelerating, and then we saw the initial Gen AI models coming from US companies. As you've noted more recently, there are at least 3 Chinese companies that have come out with Gen 2 GPT-4 models. Um, why should we be worried about this? I mean, isn't there an argument looking back at the Cold War that 2 big powers racing to develop technology, for example, space era technology, what helped us put, Sputnik and then a person on the moon, was actually productive for technological progress. So why should we be worried about this?
Well, one of the things that's different is that because this is intelligence and because it occurs quickly, you can end up with monopolies for a while. So I'll give you an example. We, America, actually invent this technology. We have all these AI scientists, which are just computer programs. We unleash them. We were doing pretty well. We're going like this, and now all of a sudden we're going like this. At that point, China says, oh my God, they got there and they accelerate there, but they're behind. There is a period of time in the race where one of the 2 protagonists has essentially monopoly control over intelligence that's stronger than humans. So what would an intelligence stronger than humans could?
Oh, I think we're having a bit of a sound difficulty. Hang on with us for a second here. We are getting this resolved. We couldn't hear.
Let's try that.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
you're back. Thank you. Yeah.
So sorry. The important thing is that in this cycle, right? When whoever is ahead can discover attacks on its opponent as well as benefits to itself, and those benefits can be very profound and are hard to characterize. So imagine a situation where, and these are thought experiments, where you have a system that uses physics and chemistry and material science and math to discover a whole new world of facts, a whole new world of weapons, a whole new world of science, a whole new world of biology. We just don't know. And this is speculation. But the consensus in my industry is that this is a race that we have to win. And in order to win, we need all the good things that America is doing. We have a shortage of energy, which you've already noted. We need more visas for foreign workers and a bunch of things like that.
So what are China's advantages over the US? You mentioned a few things the US might need, but in what way do you think Chinese companies might be advantaged in this race?
They're more focused on winning. They're more centrally controlled, and this is a case where central control can help. They're willing to spend an enormous amount of money without a particular goal. They have a tradition of very fast consumer, essentially corporate adoption that is within their firms. And I think there's every reason to believe that even if we win the first part of the race, China will eventually win the race because they adopt this sort of technology more quickly in volume products. A good example is that I spent 20 years working on various robotic solutions. And there are a number of companies that are very, very interesting that are going to build AI robot brains. All of them use inexpensive robots from China who are just as powerful, or which are just as powerful as the American ones, but much less expensive, much more flexible. So the China manufacturing might, which is without question, take a look at their dominance in batteries and solar and so forth, and cars now, could enable them to do real world things with AI that we could only dream of. China has a lot of energy, and they seem to be willing to, they don't seem to have any particular rules about data, human data, medical data, and so forth. The problem that they've had has been lack of hardware. We, America, have restricted the access to what are technically known as A100 level chips. This is the previous generation or 2 generations of NVIDIA chips. But it sure looks to us that China has found ways around those sanctions, which is not a surprise. And they've also learned how to do things with fewer chips, which is to their credit. It shows you how good engineers they really are.
And so China is now pursuing, I think, what you've characterized as the equivalent of the Chips and Science Act, which was passed here under past Congress and the Biden administration to sort of shore up our own production of chips in collaboration with Taiwan, of course, and others. But you've argued that China has an industrial policy around chip production that far surpasses ours. So is that part of the solution here, that the U.S. needs a more aggressive industrial policy around chips, or is this about trade? What's the solution?
Well, so the situation we find ourselves in is that these chips that we care about are all largely made in Taiwan through a company called TSMC, using technology that's proprietary and a monopoly by a company called ASML in Europe. So the government has made it very difficult for that technology to get to China, which was a good decision. China has its own leaders in this area. One is called Schmidt, and they're stuck at essentially what is called 7 nanometers, lower is better, and the technology that we use is 3 nanometers, again, lower is better. So one possible scenario is that our hardware will just get better and we'll be saved by that. But even if that were to occur, which I'm skeptical about, China makes essentially all of the pieces that are necessary to make semiconductors. I'm not talking about the chips, I'm talking about the glue and the carriers and so forth. So as a matter of national security, a number of us wanted very much the CHIPS Act to anticipate that. So if you anticipate conflict with China, which seems like where the government is, and it sounds like where the Chinese are, then you better figure out a way to have separate supply chains. Today, the supply chains are completely intermixed. China is very dependent on us. We're very dependent on that. That's got to get addressed somehow.
Our economies are so interlinked, US and China, and I understand your antagonistic scenario that you're raising, but there are others who would argue that our economies are so intertwined that there's unlikely to be an all-out conflict. There might be a conflict in the Straits of Taiwan over the TSMC and so forth, as you've mentioned. But is there a reason to be concerned? What's the argument for AI and AI progress to be largely dominated by democracies versus authoritarian regimes? You sort of made an argument that the central control actually helps advance the technology. But from the point of view of public benefits from this technology, what is the argument for democracy over authoritarian control over this tech?
Well, democracies are to some degree threatened by AI because democracies run on information resources, and AI is a very good misinformation source. As you know, China has solved these problems by not allowing them. So if you're a well-run autocracy, whatever that means, the first thing you would do is make sure that you don't have misinformation that could harm the regime, which is precisely what China and others have done. My personal view is quite different from the rhetoric that you hear out of Washington. My own view is that while it is absolutely true that China is developing a modern army, they're building more nuclear weapons and so forth, they are unlike Russia. They have their consensus built at a certain level, and they have concluded right now that they're too weak to go into a direct confrontation with the United States. This is my personal opinion. If you, having just recently been there, if you look at the deflation problems, there's a problem called lying down where people are not working very hard. They have a demographic challenge that's very serious. They have a credit bubble. All the things that you read about in the press are true. This is not a good time to be starting a major conflict. And whenever I'm in Beijing, I always imagine, there are all these tall buildings. There must be a building with about 1,000 people who are charged with exactly one question. If we were to cross some line with respect to Taiwan, what would the US do? And in particular, what would they do if they remove the dollar from our trading currencies? China is incredibly dependent upon the dollar as a trading regime. And until they can sort that out, which I'm sure they're working on, I think we're going to be okay. My own view of China is that we're going to have a lot of tension because they're going to push really hard. It's their nature and culture. But we shouldn't overreact beyond responding directly to what they're doing.
Okay, I want to talk about the democratic governance of AI and bring it back home a little bit here for a few moments. You are not Elon Musk. When you and I met 15 years ago, you were serving on PCAST, President Obama's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. and really trying to think through what are the policies, what's the role of government in innovation, what's the role of government in protecting us against the harm of technology where there are harms. Do you have any confidence that government policy can help bring about both the upsides of AI that we've been talking about encouraging and fomenting, but also the guardrails against the cyber attacks, the super viruses, the potential energy demands and the implications of that?
Well, one way to think about the American innovation system, which you and I have talked a lot about over the years, is it has three groups. It has the government, which provides at-risk capital or high-risk capital, legal basis, export help, it's those sorts of things. It has universities, which are the primary source of innovation because young people are incredible. And the universities in America are extraordinarily better than anyone else's, including China. And then businesses, which then, through huge risks, venture risks and others, fund these companies. That cycle has produced virtually all of the wealth of America in one form or another. It didn't come from government alone or universities alone or whatever. So America is best when those three are working together. If you look under the first Trump administration, Operation Warp Speed is a good example. There were inventions in universities, people made and lost money. The government guaranteed a certain amount of things because it was such a high priority. Thank God we're not in an Operation Warp Speed situation at the moment, but the same roles could be played. Universities are producing an enormous number of people who are going to use AI in their science work, their art work, their writing work. It's really transformative. Businesses, the vast majority of the wealth created in the market in the last few years has been what is called the Magnificent Seven, of which at least 6 are AI companies. So AI matters even if you're just an investor. And of course, the government has an important role in the sense that if you listen to the companies are running out of energy. One person explained to me that their math is that we're going to run out of energy by 2028 completely in America because these data centers are power hungry. So you could imagine a deal where all of us collectively focused on AGI, the universities, the venture capitalists, businesses, and the government in return for getting energy a lot faster would get security guarantees, access to internal models, national security things that they can't get otherwise. So that deal is a deal that could get done in the new administration. We will see.
A lot of your colleagues in Silicon Valley have made a rightward turn recently, and some of what you've described is essential to the flourishing of AI in this country, whether that's immigration or thriving higher education institutions, innovation policy, even some of the industrial policy aspects are in question under a Trump administration. Do you think it's in Silicon Valley's interest? Has this been a wise, self-interested move to move towards Trump?
Well, I don't think I can speak for Silicon Valley. If you look, the vast majority of people in Silicon Valley are registered Democrats. It's the vast number of contributions. You have a relatively small, very, very powerful, very important group that have sided with President Trump, which is a perfectly fine thing to do in our political system. So I'm in no way complaining about that, but I don't think that the rightward tilt is universal. I think it's specific, which is perfectly fine. It's how our democracy should work. I think that my Republican friends and my Democratic friends would all basically agree that the way we're going to win here is with emphasis on the private sector with some amount of government oversight and some help for them. The help that they need, I mentioned, is already in energy. These companies need high skills immigrants. It makes no sense to take a top mathematician, train them in the United States, and then kick them out. We want to keep them in the US. It's just foolish to kick them out and not keep them to build this new system. And that's yet what we're doing. So that's an example. With respect to political support for universities, there is this sort of anti-science bias in our political system. And last time I checked, science still holds, right? And the reason science works is because it's based on falsifiability. You have a result, you're a trained scientist, You demonstrate your science result, and the first thing that happens is everyone else tries to see if they can replicate it because they want to make sure you're a legitimate player and you've made a real gain. That's the check and balance on science, and that's not something that any political party can change. So my overall message is that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you want America to win. I want America to win. Everyone I know who's Republican wants America to win. The way to win is to strengthen the leading educational institutions, make sure we have enough energy and enough money, and basically then just run as fast as we can to this future, and we'll deal with all the consequences as they come along.
Do you think David Sachs, who's Trump's selection to run crypto and AI, has an appreciation of what you're arguing for?
I don't know personally what he thinks about this at the moment, so I shouldn't speculate about him. I do know that everyone, since you mentioned Elon before, every one of Elon's companies is dependent upon high skills immigration. It's dependent on government funding. It's very dependent upon electricity supplies. So there's a good example of a singular American founder and set of institutions that have the same thinking. Right? The fact of the matter is all of these tech companies are organized to win using the means that I described. There are plenty of industries where these things don't matter. There are plenty of industries which are relatively non-strategic. They're important, but it's like whatever. But the development of artificial intelligence for everything, including national security, should be a very high priority.
Eric, I want to close by asking you a question. We've been talking about the U.S. government playing a role in energy policy to support AI. We've been talking about the U.S. government playing a role in industrial policy with respect to chips and continuing to do what it can around the production of the hardware that supports this technology. But we haven't talked about the government as a supporter of innovation. And it strikes me that, a previous era of digital revolution that you very much took part in relied on and was stoked by government innovation. DARPA doing foundational research that led to the internet, Sergey and Larry's NSF grant that eventually became foundational to Google and to all the success you built there. Is the government the government obviously has not been very involved in these Gen AI models. Is the government just done with innovation policy in the U.S.? Is there still a chance that the government can play a role there?
No, remember that the National Science Foundation is a primary funder of universities. DARPA in the military is a primary funder of this kind of research. I personally was the recipient of a huge number of grants when I was much younger, when I didn't have any money. So I'm very, very grateful to those programs. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So the good news is that that model is stronger than ever. And as long as somebody doesn't do anything foolish, we will continue to have the kind of extraordinary gains looking forward. Remember, this tool, this AI tool, is a fundamental tool to achieve objectives. It allows you to build fusion because you can model fusion. It allows you to do quantum because you can simulate quantum effects. There's so many reasons to think that this underlying power tool of artificial intelligence is fundamental to the mission of innovation. Remember the formula, and you identified it before. The government funds very, very high risk research. The businesses basically take those ideas, turn them into high risk companies. Eventually they diffuse into normal companies. That cycle often takes 20 or 30 years. Look at self-driving cars. Now you can, in a number of cities, do it 30 years after the first self-driving funding was done. It just takes a while. But that is America's future, and we should be incredibly excited about that. There's no other country that has that kind of model. The Chinese model is also concerning to me because the Chinese can do things at scale, but I guess it shows you that I really believe in democracy. I do believe on balance, the flexible arrangement structures of democracies at scale can win against the authoritarian one.
Thank you so much, Eric. This has been a fascinating conversation, and thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you for watching Washington Post Live. If you're not already a subscriber, you can sign up for a Washington Post subscription and get a free trial by visiting washingtonpost.com/live. I'm Bina Venkatraman. Thanks again.